Good afternoon. Welcome to you all. As the world's attention shifted dramatically to the Ukraine and Israel-Hamas crises unfolding rapidly, the challenges posed by the humanitarian and human rights, women's rights catastrophe threatening Afghanistan have been overshadowed and moved to the backseat. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate in Afghanistan as the country's economy rolls in a deepening spiral of impoverishment and destitution. Taliban's solidification of its hold on Afghanistan has led to an intense erosion of the rights of women and girls, who now face bans in several spheres of life, with the ban on education and employment hitting them the worst. Canadian ministers Melanie Joly, Ahmed Hussein, and Mark Miller, drawing attention to the Taliban's systematic violation of human rights, have announced the Canadian government's intent to advance women's rights in Afghanistan, as per the Canadian Feminist International Assistance Policy. However, such broad statements leave us in the dark about practical measures that can be taken to reinstate the rights of Afghan women living under a repressive regime. We have today with us at the speaker's table experts to throw lights on this area. It is of prime importance that experts from the audience gallery enrich today's discussion by not only asking questions, but also presenting ideas on policies and program options with the potential to empower Afghan women facing oppressive life situation. I will now briefly introduce our experts. Dr. Sima Samar first. I first met Sima Samar in 2003 when I served as the head of Canada's aid program in Afghanistan. Today, 20 years later, I have the pleasure to welcome our guests to this knowledge mobilization session with Dr. Sima Samar, considering policy options addressing the pressing risk facing women and girls in Afghanistan. Her work as a member of the Afghan Republican government in high-level positions with the United Nations and her humanitarian relief and development activities with NGO Suhada made her globally known for her advocacy for the world's underrepresented and marginalized women, children, and minorities, conflict-affected and displaced people and refugees. More specifically, over the course of 2 decades, Dr. Samar served in various positions with the Afghan Republican government as the Vice President of the Interim Administration, Minister of Women's Affairs, and the Chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. She was a member of the Board of Advisory Board of the UN Secretary General on Mediation and a member of the high-level panel for internal displacement. She leads an NGO, Suhada, dedicated to delivering health and humanitarian relief to Afghan refugees and training Afghan women to help empower them. We are honored to have Dr. Sima Samar, a high-profile women's empowerment and rights promoter, with us today. Sima, a hearty welcome to you from the university community. I now welcome today's discussant, our very own Dr. Ruby Dagger. Dr. Ruby Dagger is a replacement professor at the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa, a consultant and researcher throwing light on current and practical issues related to conflict, legitimacy, and development. A decolonization, evaluation, gender equality, diversity, and racism, a lot of areas of interest for you all, as I see. Her past work as an official of the Canadian International Development Agency, now amalgamated with Global Affairs Canada, and her consulting work with the Caribbean Development Bank, the University of Central Asia, and the Canadian Foreign Service Institute added to her wealth of experience. Welcome, Judy. I now invite Dr. Sima Samar, our keynote speaker, to speak first. Sima, please take the stage.
Thank you very much, Nika, a friend, I would call. And thank you everyone for coming and your interest on Afghanistan. I don't know from where I should start, but I'm going to start by saying that this year is 75th anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 75 years ago, we decided that there will be a principle of human rights and dignity and rights, no matter where they live. So when some colleague keeps saying that it's a value, and my response is that no, it's a human value, no matter where we live. And then it's also almost 30 years of the Beijing Platform of Action for Gender Equality. It's not exactly 30 years, but it's 29, 28 years. And also we have SDGs that look at equality between the different gender. And we believe, all of us, that we cannot reach to a sustainable peace and development unless we have everybody involved, particularly with SDG, when they started to say that no one should leave behind. Half of the population is left behind, actually. Left behind a closed door and not involved on anything. And the other point that I would like to mention, it's began with it, that lack of justice and lack of accountability for international crimes committed anywhere, including. Why I think the international community, including UN, everybody decided that the country, the states or the government are either unwilling or unable to provide justice. Then they decided that they should establish an international court in order to deal with crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Aggression also is somehow included to that. And we in Afghanistan, because there was lack of accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity, between the extreme left, which was the USSR, and the pro-Russian people in Afghanistan, and also extreme rights that we have the Taliban. So both is extreme. So we don't have people in the middle. We tried to be in the middle in the last 20 years, but we couldn't because there was lack of justice and lack of accountability. And I keep saying that if you don't have rule of law and justice and accountability for what we commit, what we do, then there's no peace. There's no respect for human dignity. So I'm raising where I began with this by saying that we have all these instruments, but where we are in Afghanistan, we ignored justice when the USSR collapsed and the government, which was supported by USSR, was in place. There was no accountability for the crimes committed by them. They was really arbitrarily in every corner of the country. We had millions and millions of Afghans who became refugees in the neighboring countries in Iran and Pakistan. Iran was at war with Iraq, and they used the Afghan refugees as a labor, cheap labor, and also some, and they unfortunately went to the war, the battlefield because they were paying. They were in such a desperate situation. In Pakistan, they also used the funds for the infrastructure. The most difficult work was done by Afghans with a small amount wages, with a very limited amount of money that they were getting. And what was happened, education was denied to the Afghan refugee children. And access for health and reproductive health was denied, of course, for refugee families and refugee women who were living in the camp. Because they were thinking that, okay, the war with Russia will continue for a longer time, so we need more children to born in order to be firewood to continue the fight with USSR. And we end up with those children who born in poverty and the families were not able to feed them. So they gave them to those madrasas, which was established for the Afghan refugees, to teach them and feed them also. So unfortunately, the Western countries and the Arab countries supported that policy. And religion, Islam, was used as a weapon of war and tried to brainwash those children who were grown up in those madrasas. So the reason I'm saying is that it is actually the three issues that put us in a very difficult situation. One was the lack to education, because I believe education is key to every possible empowerment for sustainable development, for peace, for people to live with dignity, for understanding their rights, basically. And then the connection between education and health, you all know, and then the lack of access to health and production of those so many children, and the inferior situation that the woman was put, because men were fighting, and they were the one who fighting against the USSR and trying to stop the USSR from advancement, not women. The women were not important. So practically men were, we already living in a patriarchal society and very conservative society, but war put us more in a patriarchal condition and empowered patriarchy in the country. So women, the gap between men and women and the empowerment of men in that situation actually create discrimination against half of the population. So women were not counted. I remember that I started a school, and I put the book for the elderly girls, because the girls who were not able to attend the school, they were 13 or 12, they were not able to sitting. They didn't want to sit with the 6-year-old or 7-year-old girl in the same classroom. So I wrote the book as a literacy book, and I put, because I'm a medical doctor, so I put some health education on it. And at the end of the book, it was about family planning and contraception. I went to UNESCO, this is 1990s. I asked UNESCO person, I said, can you print this book for me? And he looked at me, he said, well, leave the book here. And I asked my Afghan colleague to translate, because we are not printing anything which is related to religion. I said, there's no religious things, it's just the health information. So after a week when I went, he said, well, you're talking about family planning, so we are not printing that, because our office will be bombed or attacked. And I said, don't print the last 3 pages and print the rest. No, we cannot do that. So that was the attitude when we have all these highly populated country with lack of resources, uneducated, unskilled, unemployed men. So what they do, of course, they join these gangs group or the terrorist groups to fight. So the discrimination between men and women starts from there. So we already began the gap between the gender equality within the family. So discrimination continues from family and goes out to the street and the society. I'd like to mention here was the denying of the principle of human rights. People were not talking about human rights. Using word human rights during the first Taliban regime and the Mujahideen regime was a crime. And they were saying that the people who talk about equality, the people who particularly talking about equality between men and women, they're not good Muslims. That easy. So when we ignore the principle of human rights and equality, actually continue the conflict. We actually promote the continuation of the conflict and discrimination within the society. When there's a discrimination, if it's family or society, the conflict will continue. The tension will continue. So that was the reason in Afghanistan. So I would say that, unfortunately, in the last 20 years, Nipa was kind enough to introduce me. So I hope I was not part of the failure in Afghanistan, because I was not part of the government. I was leading an independent institution for human rights, and I'm grateful to Canadian people who supported some of my program. And I believe that education is key to freedom, to equality, and to justice even. So the failure in Afghanistan, I believe, is collective failure. It's not only the failure of international community, but it's failure of Afghan people, it's failure of the Afghan government, it's failure of the international community, including UN agencies. So I think this collective failure requires collective approach to fix it. So I end up by saying that, yes, we know that there's a lot of demand all over the world. There's an earthquake, there's a hurricane, there's a flooding, there's a conflict here and there, even in countries which we claim that there's no conflict, there are conflicts. There are poverty which create conflict. But ignoring Afghanistan is not going to solve the conflict either in Ukraine or in Middle East or in Syria. So Afghanistan has its unique problems and it requires attention, because we already have a bad experience with ignoring Afghanistan, with denying Afghanistan problem. So I would like, as a human rights defender, I claim to be, that I do not want to see the reputation of the history in another part of the world. Unfortunately, we see the reputation of history in my country, and one of the reasons is lack of accountability and justice.
Thank you, Sima, and I will now request you to take the stage and present your views.
Thank you. I will be brief. I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much and welcome for everybody who's here. I have to start off by saying I'm not Afghan. So what I'm saying is not from an Afghan perspective. I am Lebanese, so very sort of a good understanding, at least of Arab cultures, other than, traveling various parts of the world and being here. So I do want to start. I know we did the land acknowledgement. There's one thing I always start with, and I like to start with that no matter what I do. And I think there's an important lesson in that, is that when we acknowledge which land we sit on, it's not a checkbox exercise. And it's not a way for us to say we've done something. When we do land acknowledgement, it's a means for us to rethink about what we know, how we know it, whose voices we're hearing. And it also places the onus and the responsibility on us to go get the information and not always wait for the information to be dropped into our lap. And so for me, a lot of what I just said right now is extremely valid for anybody who's interested in international development, anybody who's interested in understanding other situations around the world, and doing any type of work related to this. And the reason why I say this is because, and it's partly my own personal experience, partly my work, partly my research, my work with the government of Canada, which I did and I still do, is that what we're missing in this world is an understanding of nuance. And the reason why I say this is because when we think about women in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, or in other places around the world, we're thinking of a certain type of image that comes to our mind. We're not really thinking of women. We're thinking of a woman, our own image of what a woman is. And what we're also missing in that is understanding the complexities of that society. And so I grew up in the middle of the civil war in Lebanon, okay? I had significant members of my family, a good number of women in my family who did not fight for other women. And I had a good portion of men in my family who fought for women. And so what that made me understand very clearly is that sometimes when we put all women in the same basket, we're missing all these nuances and what it actually means. And when we put all men in the same basket, we're also missing those nuances and what it actually means. And so we have to really reconsider that complexity around the understanding of the roles of the different people in society and what it really means. And one of the biggest reasons why I bring this forward as well, and first thing that I thought of is I was watching one of the presentations, Dr. Sima, that you gave. I can't remember, it was a few months ago. And there was something that I think was really interesting to me. And you said something to the effect of men understand the importance of an educated woman and want their daughters to be educated, but they are being instrumentalized and being put in positions where they have to do what they're doing. And in that sense, for me, it starts there. We're in a better understanding of what the role of men is and how they're being used and what it means, because that is half of the society. That's where we have to work with. It's the half of that society. The other part that I always talk about, and again, comes personal experience research, and I've done research around the Middle East. I've done research in other places, like physically, when I used to work for the government of Canada, I've also done a lot of field research, field visits, and stayed in certain places for a while. And one of the things that always comes clear to me, and maybe it's because I come from the Arab world, is that women in non-Western based countries, in my opinion, are real heroes. They're fighters. We don't see their fight because we don't measure their fight, because the indicators we choose to measure women's rights or measure women's situation doesn't pick up on these women who are grandmothers who at risk for getting hurt from their husbands, or at risk from being shunned by the society, decide that it's okay for their granddaughter and their daughter to get an education. We don't realize the efforts that these women are making in fighting the system, because it's not so obvious and it's not something we see in front of us. And so when we don't see these fights, we don't really see the heroism in what they're doing and the fight that they're putting forward. And therefore, we can't build on that. And we're assuming that it doesn't exist, or we're assuming that it's so little. And then we come with different ideas that erases or replaces. And so one of the things I think that Dr. Sima as well, if I could just bounce off some of the ideas, is that Afghan women have been putting up this fight. Sometimes it's been in the open, when you were able to do it in the open, and sometimes it's been underground, and sometimes it's been behind closed doors, and sometimes it's been outside the country, but there has been a fight. And this is something I think that we don't recognize enough. And we actually tend to see Afghan women as poor women, oh my God, what they're going through, which is true. We have to recognize a difficult situation, but we can't also infantilize them. We can't also always see them as victims, because they're actually active in improving their lives, the same way as other women as well, same way as women in my country are doing. And so for me, it's about that choice. It's about that ability to be able to push, to defend, to fight. It's that choice that matters. Whether a woman wants to stay home, wants to go to work, wants to do this, wants to do that, that's her choice. It should be her choice and not somebody else's choice and not somebody else's power. So we're talking about that choice, and we're not talking about a specific ideology or a specific way of defining a woman and a woman's role in society, because we tend to shun women these days, especially in Canada, who decide to stay home with their children. And so we have to think about that complexity of the choice. And so from that perspective, if I put these pieces together, what I've realized in doing my research and in doing my work and speaking to several women who have a difficult time in doing things out in the open and in pushing the limits, is that we need to sometimes think about it. If we can't think about it as, societal change, we need to think about it as societal adjustment, at least for now, because the point is to keep moving the needle forward. Sometimes we can move it pretty fast, sometimes we cannot. But the idea is the recognition that things are being done. How can we continue to sustain these things that are being done? And this is where, I appreciate that there's a lot of responsibility put on Afghans themselves, but also on the international community. And as my research and my work, and again, my personal experience in conflict situations, one thing that is for sure is that the international community doesn't really have a good track record when it comes to post-conflict development. I think we've established that quite well. It is partly because women are not at the table. It is partly that women don't get to say much, but it's also partly where an approach where we tend to infantilize them, where we tend to say expertise comes from the outside, where we tend to pick on certain voices and ignore the rest. I have, preparing for this session, I did quite a bit of research and kind of looking at these various things. It's unbelievable when you read things about Afghan women. And I'm a visual person, so as I read things, images start coming to my mind. When you read things about Afghan women, it's the same thing as you read things about Iraqi women or, Palestinian women or Lebanese women. You start to see them as sort of these quiet victims who need the support to be able to do something, rather than these fighters, these people who are trying to improve their lives on a daily basis. And then it's really helpful if we can help them. But it doesn't mean that as we help them, we tell them what they need to do. And unfortunately, this has been the approach of the international community when it comes to understanding women in these situations. And so one of the things, I think the focus or some of the suggestions, to me, when I talk about these women doing things that we don't see, I think in Lebanon, in various parts of Lebanon, for example, in various parts of Palestine, in various parts of Iraq, of other places as well, including Afghanistan, women have grassroots movements that are hidden. They're not out in the open. These are things we can support. We can still declare our support for official change and change out in the open, and requiring and pushing the Taliban, for example, in the case of Afghanistan, to make change. But not forgetting as well that we can support these grassroots movements by these Afghan women who have pushed and kept fighting and pushed the needle and have not given up, with all the history that Dr. Sima has talked about today, but also others have talked about. This fight continues. This fight continues, and these grassroots organizations are learning how to maneuver. Save the Children came out with a report, I think, or a study to say that their own sub-organizations are learning to reframe what they want to do so that it sounds Islamic for the Taliban, so that it doesn't put the spotlight on them, but then they can still do what they need to get done, right? And that they have also found that these efforts and the negotiations have varied from place to place, from region to region, which means that there is hope. There are still efforts that can be made. Nowhere near what needs to be done. nowhere near the changes that need to be done at the national level. But for me, what it shows me is that there is a movement there. There are efforts there. There are women making the change. And realistically speaking, even under the current system, this is a plus that exists, and we can work with them to help them with their own knowledge of what safety means for them, of how the situation is, because they're the ones who know their situation. We can work with them while other people from the outside or the inside do the job of raising awareness outright and making changes in the system. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. As a moderator, I'm not supposed to speak. However, because of the lateness of this, the information we got from Sima, I couldn't look for too many people. So I decided that I normally don't speak in these sessions. However, I decided I will speak. And it's because noting my experience with different countries in the world and many Islamic countries, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan, of course. So my experiences, etc. And I wanted to mention or relate to you some options, some programming options that I have seen that are working in some of the Islamic countries. And I will just pose the question. After I relate what these are, I want to pose the question to the audience as well as Sima and Ruby to say, are these workable in Afghanistan? Would these kind of options work? What I understand from a lot of people is that they hear a lot about the situation of women in Afghanistan, but not much is discussed on what are the options available, programming strategies and options available. And this will be one of the, this is one of the interests of students, I see, as well as the interests of the wider community in Canada. I will talk a little bit about that. I will read from, because I get very confused when I'm speaking extempore, and that will be more a bother than not. So I will speak from my speaking notes, and then after there could be responses. Ruby will take the questions for everybody. And one thing I want to mention now is that I'm very pleased that I see some men in this session. Normally in women's, in sessions with women's issues, we don't see anybody but women. I mean, the women are very valuable, but having men is good. And in this session, I would like to hear from the men who are here, and some of them are very experienced. Most of them are very experienced, as I see, including one of our students, Abdullah Mamun. And I would like you to comment what you find. Okay, so I will what I find in going on in Bangladesh and whether or not these kinds of stories can inspire us. I'm one of the earliest proponents of talking to or engaging with the Taliban to prevent further deterioration of the humanitarian and women's rights situation in Afghanistan. Engagement does not imply immediate recognition of the Taliban de facto government. The engagement should be understood as joint talks of the international community with the Taliban on step-by-step measures with the Taliban, that the step-by-step measures that the Taliban must take to fulfill Afghanistan's international obligations and the international community to provide agreed-upon concessions to the Taliban in return. In parallel, humanitarian relief and longer-term development aid, prioritizing aid to women living in extreme poverty in urban slums and poverty-stricken rural areas can be slowly introduced and operated. The experience of an international NGO, BRAC, with origin in Bangladesh, tells us that a low-profile stand without raising the societal and religious leaders' eyebrows has a better chance of survival. Narratives on feminism may turn off the administration and the society as such, endangering the survival of assistance programs. I will give you examples of program options that has worked out for the benefit of women in Bangladesh, wherein Islam is the state religion. An option that BRAC widely uses involves assistance to women to engage in home-based small-scale endeavors with very small-scale startup investments. For instance, individuals or groups of women from rural households are trained in making juices and condiments at home from tropical fruits grown in women's small kitchen gardens or collected from wildernesses and delivered to the women by male household members. NGO workers take away the prepared condiments for bottling and canning and then sell the products in the market. The profit returns to the women who become the sole decision makers of the use of the funds. The income enables them to contribute to household expenses, children's schooling, medicines, etc. Such income-empowered women earn the respect of their husbands and, in the course of time, that of the village community and societal members. This is a locally relevant, market-driven solution that does not require women to go out of the secure surroundings of their homes. The religious conservatives of the nature of the Taliban are silenced as they cannot argue the ban on women's work for security reasons. I provide examples of other small business ventures for aiding women. Milk is collected by NGO workers every morning from rural women who raise goats and cows. The milk, pasteurized and bottled in urban factories, is sold in the market, with the sale products going to the rural women, the cow and the goat raisers. Many businesses, from tailoring and small-scale clothing shops to tea stalls, fish, vegetables, and fruit vending stalls, are operated by women in front of their homes. As the businesses take off, microcredit is provided to the businesswomen, along with training for asset management and savings to maximize the business investment return. These programs help empower women economically, which is the first step to women's overall empowerment, because income helps women establish themselves as valuable members of the society. Restriction on education for women and girls is another impediment that dooms the lives of women in Afghanistan. I will relate to you how BRAC explained its success story in promoting education for girls in Bangladesh, a country with Islam as the state religion. As with women's business ventures, BRAC started the work in a low key. Their first step was to meet with the village mullah at the mosque. They then settled themselves in the village, attending the prayers every single day at the village mosque. They familiarized themselves with the community and developed friendships discussing economic, social, and cultural issues that affect the villagers. The mullah somewhat inadvertently mentioned in one of these social gatherings that he would have liked his young daughters to attend school, but that the way to the school was not secure. After a week or two, Bragg would ask the mullah if he might want to rent the front room of his home for a small rent of $10 a month to start a school for girls in a secure environment where his daughters could attend. After a week or so, the mullah agreed. A community school was thus founded with the blessings of the mullah, whose commands also influenced the community members to support the school and help secure the road for little girls in the village to walk to the school at the village mullah's home. Today, community schools are seen in almost every village in Afghanistan, and girls are being empowered. The schools are no longer at village mullahs' homes, but the mullahs wholeheartedly support these schools. Bragg's stories on women's business ventures and community schools underline the importance of starting programs for the promotion of women's advancement in a low-key fashion. Bragg says that it avoids pushing feminist principles and women's rights issues in an Islamic society, as it might backfire. For protecting educational space for girls, they see as the most critical need the establishment of friendly relations with religious scholars, leaders, and mullahs whose support will help stimulate the entire community's support for the education programs. No doubt, Bangladesh is the home of moderate Islam, as opposed to Afghanistan, which embraces radical Islam. And yet, with some adjustment, these programming options bear the possibility of producing results in Afghanistan as well. The results are poor women from villages and urban slums are empowered with income, community support, and social presence, which address the social and economic dimensions of women's empowerment. Now, I ask our experts present today to consider donor funding for options of this nature. What is your advice? I turn to Sima first, and then Ruby will take questions from, and please, I would like everybody, including the men, to provide comments.
Thank you, Nipa. But you forgot that Bangladesh has a prime minister who's a woman, opposition is woman, and opposition is woman. It's not a mullah who is in position or in opposition. Of course, there is a possibility, and I think the woman in Afghanistan also does this. There was a program like collecting milk from the village, and they said that they buy the milk as in order to give the money to the woman to go to. And my own experience during the first Taliban regime on the Hazara area in 1998, we got some money from USAID on that time. We bought wool from women because the wool from sheep. We paid the money to the women. Of course, they bought food. And then we gave the wool to another group of women who make a thread. I don't know how to, yeah, spin it. We gave the third party to weave blanket. And we distributed the blanket on as a relief program to flooding and to the refugees who returned from Pakistan and Iran to Afghanistan. So they were kind of with one amount of money, maybe it was around 50,000 or something. We actually turn it 4 times within the society. That is possible. But I think, although you know that I like Dr. Robert and I know him from 1995 and I'm very good friend. Robert Boye and I'm Sima sister, Bahan, but it's a completely different environment. But yes, we can do all those things. We can start. I mean, we were able to, as still we are running some homeschool because we don't advertise this because I don't want the Taliban to come after us and find where we do this. We teach the girls online, even on university level. But again, we don't advertise in order for Taliban to stop it. There's a possibility to do all those kind of work, and we do it. And by the way, Afghan women, I believe that they were the strongest women. They watched everything. They saw the killing of their loved ones. They saw the destruction of their homes. They saw the you name it, the destruction of the killing of even of their livestock. Because when the Russians were bombing the villages, they were even bombing the livestock of the people. They were bombing the water points. And we have kind of a corrèze, we call it. It's a tunnel underground, and there's a water points that were also bombed. And people survived, women were survived. But I want to say that what you see in the media, that the Afghan men with long beard, with the gun and aggressive, beating everybody, they have the stick on their hand and beating everyone, and women under those blue burqa, that is not all Afghans. Sorry to say, we have Afghans over there, and I'm one of those non-burqa person, not behind the blue burqas. We do try to survive, and we survived 45 years. When the people that we should not forget that we fought with a very big superpowers. Afghans were the reason for the solving of USSR. And as Taliban keeps saying, they are the one who fought with NATO. In this current planet, in this current century. But it doesn't mean that we should not recognize and acknowledge the suffering of the people. This is really important, that the suffering of the people has to be acknowledged and has to be dealt. And I think, yes, we as an Afghan, we have the main responsibility, but I think it's a responsibility of every human being who believes on human rights, who believe on human dignity. It's the problem of every household, of every father who has a daughter, of all the humanity. So it's not only for Afghan women who are forced to beg on the street, who are forced to sell one of their kidney in order to feed the rest of the children, in order to bring their daughters in the market, a 4-year-old daughter in the market to sell in order to feed the others. So these are the human responsibility. That's why I think we have to be innovative. Of course, we can do what you said and what BRAC does in Bangladesh. But I just wanted to remind you that position in opposition is female.
Thank you, Dr. Sima. Before we get to the questions, I do want to also add a few things. I think, 20 years is an entire generation. And when you promise things, and when you are raised, especially as a new generation, on different ways of thinking, on promises of different lives, it's a big drop to suddenly not be able, like it's a shock, and that's a normal shock. And when I talk about the resilience and when I talk about all of this, it doesn't erase the fact that this has been a hard blow. And it definitely is something that one cannot erase and one cannot ignore. But I think talking about the resilience of Afghan women, it's not to say that we can't work on the bigger issues or the bigger system, or the fact that it is, a whole generation whose views and understandings and beliefs might have changed. But it's also, as a person who studies this issue quite a lot, and I'm stepping back and looking at this, when I talk about the resilience of Afghan women, same as the resilience of Palestinian women, Arab women, women in the DRC and other places, it's to say that they should be in control, and it shouldn't be something based on somebody else's perception of what needs to be done, because it needs to be adapted. It is a human value, but there are different ways in implementing it, and ways in, making sure that it is understood and it is accepted. And when we infantilize them and when we see them as victims, we tend to make decisions for them rather than have them sitting in the driver's seat. And we tend to do that a lot with women around the world. Always assume that, they're victims and they can't do much, right? So, that recognition of their fight is a recognition of the fact that they know, and we need to put them in the driver's seat, not us, based on what we think. Okay, so maybe starting off with the questions, if I could take at least 2 questions at a time, does that work, Dr. Sima? Yeah? Okay. Can you get me the lapel mic, please? Okay, so we'll do 2 questions at a time. No, she's getting me another mic like this, so Dr. Sima can keep her mic and this can do the two.
You take it.
I wanted to pick up some people I know, and I would like to maybe comment. Eileen, Alexia, who was my colleague in Afghanistan, and she worked several years on Afghanistan program, and she is knowledgeable. So what her perceptions are, I'm thinking of Teddy Sammy, the director of NIPSIA, Norman Patterson School. And if Teddy, you could comment, because you talked about it with me and I got interested in what you needed to know. And then there is Abdullah Mamoun, who is our student, but he was in Afghanistan working for BRAC. And I think you might have been involved in some of these schools and all that. By the way, I saw one of these schools that BRAC created in Afghanistan also. Rebecca, your group, you said, might be interested in speaking or asking questions.
We only have...
It is not till 5.
Yeah, we only have 25 minutes. It's 4:30.
Okay.
So we only have,
that one is not correct.
Yeah, so we only have 20 minutes. So if there are so many interventions, there are questions as well by others, so maybe we can keep them short so that we can get to everybody else.
Okay, and then there are Afghans here. I see. You would have inputs, and particularly about options, programming options. I'm not saying that we should not talk about the sufferings of the women. I am thinking of some practical interventions that can be taken to move the agenda for women. Okay.
How do you want to start? You named several people, so how are you what are you thinking?
Oh, okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. And I'm so delighted to see Dr. Sima Samar after 2 years. So after the collapse of the Republic government, so we have seen each other for 2 years. Such a pleasure.
If you could mention your name and.
Sure,
what
sure.
you're doing.
Yeah, I was about to mention just a second, yeah. So my name is Naeem Ayubzada, and I'm working with the Afghanistan Women Foundations, which is established here in Ottawa. So the new women who are the newcomer immigrated after the collapse of the governments, they are here, and I am helping them to working with the foundations. And I had the honor of working with Dr. Saab in a committee. We worked together it was very tough committee to work, but we made it, and we had a regular engagement and communications on the human rights issues and women back in Afghanistan. Aside with that, we also traveled to different countries, and I was responsible to do a democratic process assessment in more than 20 countries. My question is that we are hearing all about failures for the last 2 years. I attended several conferences, workshops, seminars, not only here, remotely in other countries. We hear about the failures. And we understand, if you go back to our history, so after every 5 years, we have to reinvent everything. So if you go back to 4 or 5 decades, so that was the whole story we had in Afghanistan. So there were a lot of failures, and I'm sure we learned a lot. But I'm interested to start or establish a new chapter about what will be the new engagement of Afghanistan. What needs to be done for women? Because I regularly contact my partners back in Afghanistan, and there is injustice, violations, poverty, especially for women back there. And we from the news, and we hear directly from our partners. So what will be the new engagement from the international community aside with the projects? I don't want the issues to be project based. It should be because we are human and we are working for the human rights. We have to see as a broader picture for Afghanistan, not only as a project, but what project need to be implemented in order to help one side of the issues, one small part of or section of the issues. So what will be the new engagement? Because one of the big failures was there was no clear picture of international community engagement, political engagement, intelligence engagement, and humanitarian engagement. That was one of the failure. So what will be the new engagement of international community and the organizations for Afghan women, for Afghanistan, to overcome such a major challenge we're having back in Afghanistan? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we want to add one more?
Yeah, let's do one more question.
Please. Just
So I
again, for
had
the sake of time, just maybe if you can make it
just
quick.
shorter questions.
Okay, thank you. It was a very interesting session, by the way. Just to introduce myself, I formerly worked with Global Affairs Canada. Nipa and I worked together at seat actually for many years. I was the analyst for Afghanistan program 2015-16. And I looked at was looking into the programming options as well. Later on, I worked in the economic growth, and I was looking at economic growth in fragile states. So I have some idea, but I just wanted to share this thing. Afghanistan is a very poor country. You all know that. 90% of its economy actually is informal, right? That's no coincidence. Being an informal economy, 90% and being poor. That's quite clear. And globally even, forget about Afghanistan, globally even, women are mostly in the informal economy. And I think if any programming options has to take place, will have to be within that sector to work slowly. Nipa has had a good example on BRAC. When BRAC's program, I also did 2 years with BRAC, the BRAC programming and how it tries to help. And that is all very good. The only, of course, problem is the level of orthodoxy in Afghanistan compared to Bangladesh or Indonesia. That's a big problem, actually. What I was saying is that when you're dealing with women who are asset-less, who don't have any asset, then I guess the only solution is first education and then the input subsidy. There seems to be no other way around it. Because otherwise they will remain in that position now. And this is what BRAC has been able to do, to provide the necessary training first and then give the necessary input to come up. My other problem, very quickly now, I don't want to take any time here, is Dr. Ruby. One thing I did notice is that the research is very poor in the area of role of women in conflict and post-conflict societies. I can say that very clear. I kept my eyes on that one, and he is very poor. I think we need to, the academics have to come forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Zoda. I am glad that we see. We worked a lot on the monitoring of elections with our topic. I think we still does a lot of work. I mean, women in Afghanistan really is part of the survival of the country. But the last 20 years of the intervention by the international community was partially lack of coordination between the international community itself. Everybody was doing on their own way. One of the problems, they were not listening to the Afghans. They were coming with pre-cooked cake and asking us to eat it. Sometimes it was sour, sometimes it was salty, sometimes it was even already gone bad. So we don't have to, I mean, my discussion with the Minister of Public Health, I said, we don't need to advertise for contraception. We just need to facilitate and have it for them. We had a proper family planning in all of the hospitals before the war, 50 years ago. When mothers were going for vaccination or pregnant women were going for medical checkup, they were getting all the information, and including they had access to pills, they had access to condom, they had access to injection. And after the war, people are not talking about it. When I fought with the Minister of Public Health, I said, why are you not working in this field? Well, 18% of women has access. I said, it's not enough. It's not enough. If a woman, and that's what I was talking with for example, women who were in police, women who were in army, women who were in other profession, I was saying, you have to have a plan in your life. You cannot have 10 children and be a police officer. Clear cut. It doesn't require a master's degree or PhD on mathematics. If you have 10 children, you don't have time for anything else. You cannot be a professional police. You cannot be a professional medical doctor. You cannot be a professional politician. So it is really needed to have to facilitate things for people, for women, or if we really believe of poverty and stop the degradation of environment more, you need to focus on population control. We need to stop the militarization. And how much money is spent on the militarization and making bombs, and nobody is funding the reproductive rights in Afghanistan, but they're willing to give us bomb and drop bombs on us. So I think it requires a collective, again, I would say a collective action in reaction to our governments who really promote militarization and spend more money on making missiles. And our neighbor Pakistan is making missiles and name it on behalf of Afghanistan city. We have Ghaznavi, they have Ghaznavi missiles. They have Ghori missiles. Ghor and Ghazni is the two provinces in Afghanistan, just to provoke us. So we need to stand against those things.
Yeah, I think mine is working. Okay. The new engagement from the international community, not necessarily a project-based one. One of the all the research that is done related to the situation of women, but other vulnerable groups, not just women, in countries that have a very cohesive, controlled, cultural type societies. Okay, that it's very difficult to make changes. One of the questions we need to ask, and this is we don't do enough as an international community, is what are the unintended consequences of doing what we're actually doing? Because we believe in doing this. We believe in the rights of women. And so we go and we do what we believe in, but we don't think about the unintended consequences. And one of the clear unintended consequences in Afghanistan was not only men, but some women feeling that this was against their culture or that it was imposed from the outside, as from my understanding. Again, I'm not Afghan. I have never been to Afghanistan, but the research that I have done. And so I think one of the things that the international community has to do differently is, yes, put Afghan women at the forefront, but also, you know, one of the things I kind of mentioned this really quickly in my little time that I spoke, which is not all women believe in the empowerment of women. Okay. Some women are more horrific to other women than the men are to certain women. And for some of us, we've lived this, and for others, you know, maybe not. And when you walk into societies and you understand that these nuances and you understand that concept and you think about the unintended consequences, your approaches tend to be different. And thinking about these unintended consequences and thinking about these nuances, one of the things that I think is so undersold by the international community, two things. One is a necessity to slow it down in countries that have such a difficult environment to make change in because of these unintended consequences. But another one is to realize that some of the changes that are necessary might not be exactly what we think of or that obvious to the rest of the world, but it's the seeds that you are planting for eventual change. And these seeds need to be planted with women and men, not just with women, because it's a society, it's an ecosystem that works. And so I think that international community has a different view and understanding of what needs to be done and how it's done. And they don't really, honestly, from what I've seen, they don't really understand the situation before deciding what needs to be done. Okay. But again, what I said earlier, which is that supported mechanism for 20 years broke down when it became when the Taliban took over. So it ruined. So we have to be careful. But the other thing I want to say as far as women, you know, there is a bit of research, decolonial style, on women. But one of the things we also tend to make a huge mistake on, and I think this is a part of we have to reconsider, which is this. When we say women present in the government, everything goes better. No, not all women represent women. Not all women think the same way. And some women have been more oppressive than other women. When we think about who's in the government, what they're doing, when we think more about what it means, we have a better understanding and appreciation of women. When we think about women who are also capable of fighting, we stop talking about women that are peace-loving and men that are violent, and we start understanding the complexity of the situation. So I think there is research, there is research, but I think from that perspective, we're not approaching it very much. There isn't much approaching it from that perspective that's more nuanced. We're still stuck in the old understanding.
There is a
Anna?
person there, Anna.
Yeah.
No. Okay, there.
Yeah.
Okay. And at the back.
The back end. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I have 3 roles here actually. I'm working with the National Research Council full-time, as well as I'm teaching here quantitative reasoning in international development. So I spent 8 years in Afghanistan working with BRAC and Aga Khan Foundation. And whenever I actually cross the airport and the people see my passport, that where you are going, and Afghanistan, I say, then they feel that it's a bomb from Afghanistan on that airport. But I used to say that not bomb, but also lots of rose blooms in Afghanistan. I have seen the best rose flower in Afghanistan. And you may know that from history, the Mughal emperor that started from Afghanistan, the Babur's garden that is also in Kabul. And at the same time, some anecdotes, the founder of microfinance, actually they're Afghan. And you can also find the literature from Pastor Hassan Abed and also others. So if we think about women, their past, present, and future. So if we think about the past, the famous Hindu religious book is called Mahabharata. One of the main character is Gandhari. Actually, she was from Afghanistan, Kandahar, we say. Another is we can also think about the king, that Amanullah, and behind the king, of being the king, his mother played a role, very important role. So women, I mean that they are very much aware of the politics as well as the other issues, and maybe they are behind the screen, but at the same time, the Taliban, they also, of course, have mothers, sisters, and they aware about it. Maybe we don't know. First is who will build a cat. That would be one issue. There might be many theory of changes, but where is our theory of action? And where is our optimum solution? So because resources are always limited, there is no abundance. But where we could use that resource, of course, Afghanistan, not Bangladesh, but can we also do some sort of very good force field analysis? Because still, all the Taliban are not killing all the women, definitely not. So what are the forces actually, encouraging them to have at least this stage, the positive forces? Maybe at lower level conditional cash transfer or many other program we could think about. But the main point is that I work in Afghanistan, I know, and I have seen that people also spend money where that was not actually good to spend, or the way was not good. So I think maybe it's also a learning process. Maybe we will do better. I still believe in hope. Thank you.
Yeah.
Canada has the Canadian soldiers, I've often heard them on the radio saying how wonderful our service was in Afghanistan. I wondered, but I didn't, I thought it was overblown. But there is a Canadian journalist whose name escapes me already, who wrote a book that criticizes Canada. The dogs are eating them now. And when he was on the radio, CBC radio, and I thought if anybody wants to have at least to my feelings, he was speaking closer to the truth of what he saw and experienced in Afghanistan. Just mentioning that. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, but
Graham Smith.
There was a question. That one, sorry. Okay.
Among the first.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sir, welcome.
Thank you.
And Nipa and Ruby, thank you very much for getting such a platform which is focusing on many issues in Afghanistan, which is very important. I have a quote which I've just been discussing with a few women activists, girl activists in Afghanistan. I was sharing life during the first time of Taliban, to give them hope and how the situation was and what they can learn and how they can proceed with issues, atrocities and problems and continuing life in Afghanistan. One of my youngest sister, she said that, brother, the situation is different. Our situation is much more different, even worse than a blind person. A blind person doesn't know what he or she loses because she hasn't seen or he hasn't seen it. We have seen in 20 years the freedom, go to school, practice freedom of speech, and practice having, our right. But now we've been said that, no, you don't have the right. So we know what you're missing. So that's the code that clarified to me that, yeah, situation is different. The context is different. When I was working with the UN during the first time of the Taliban, we had a program called income generation activities. So we've been providing $10,000 to a community, and they would, invest that into income generation activities, and the benefits would go to social benefits and creation of schools and so on and so on. It was community mobilization, it was practice of rights, it was education, it was also economic boost of the community. What we've done in the last 20 years, we've dismantled those traditional practices by creating formal structures, which now these structures cease to exist. So the point I just want to make is that first, we need to really educate ourselves because the context is different now. You are not seeing girls that they are not informed, they are not aware. They're well educated, sophisticated in the conversation. They have seen the process and development. So as Dr. Ruby and Dr. Samar stated, they need to be provided a platform to engage and take the lead. They know the problem and they know the solution. So what needs to happen politically? Pressure so that there's a platform, there's an environment for engagement to be provided. And as previous speakers said, in creating a positive atmosphere for them to engage. Not really pushing the Taliban, they have to go to school. No, it gradually it will make happen. Through as you said, through girls and women and wives of those people, and bring those positive information and let girls and women to educate their men within their households. And what's the case in the past? The other thing, we need to also know that we've lost the capacity in institutions. We've had Dr. Samar, who was giving us hope during the first time of the Taliban, and many other leaders. You don't see those leaders there now. So many people know, but you need people that they would take the lead. So an environment needs to provide so that some of the Afghans go back and engage. Because I was talking to a friend who was now working back to the UN because he was called, that he used to be working with us during the first time of the Taliban. So his experience and expertise would be of use. But you know what he said to me? He said to me that, Yama, I'm totally illiterate. What I knew doesn't apply because I don't understand. That's what we need to re-educate ourselves in terms of understanding the context, knowing what we have in there, and what is the right approach. Definitely, Nipa, those projects, BRACs, and so on, there might be, workable initiatives. But I also refer to what Naeem was saying, that we need a political level. There should be an engagement. There should be a clarity of international community to take a stand, to create that platform and environment. And then all projects will come. Thank you very much.
Yeah, two more. Yeah. I realize it's late. I'm Phaedra Morris. I was head of development cooperation in Afghanistan from 2014 to 16, and then Bangladesh 17, 2022, and then South Sudan just came back. So I just first want Dr. Samar to say, I don't think the image in Canada of Afghan women is hiding behind the veil. I think we see day after day protests in the street, and Canadians are awed, and the courage is astounding. So the message I just want you to hear is the vision we are seeing is absolute courage. And so just to note, but you're the expert in the room. So the question, I really want to take the time to ask you the question right now with the challenges that there are for programming, but coming from a donor perspective, I've worked at now for close to 20 years, is how do we get funds to organizations with all the financial requirements that we require because of our accountability to taxpayers. And so it is not about us thinking in general when we program, oh, we know better than anyone in the country. I don't know any development practitioner that thinks that. It is more, which organization can I legally send money to? And how will they be able to deliver? So right now, what is the most effective way you think we can support Afghan women? Point blank.
Really support, not talking about that.
Heather Lewis, University of Women Helping Afghan Women, CFUW Ottawa. I have a naive question for Dr. Samar. How do we get more accountability?
First of all, Yamajan, good to see you. He was working with us at the Human Rights Commission for a short time, but we always been a friend, I would say. I think I spent the whole day today with the global affairs and pushing them to support Afghan civil society outside and also inside, rather than only charging a good amount on the overhead cost. One of the issues that we faced with some of the international companies in Afghanistan that I remember there was one program in Herat that they're distributing goats for the families. And the overhead cost and security cost was much more than the actual money going to the people. So I think that is one thing. And I would suggest not to fund the new NGOs because it's Congos, it's the governmental made institutions. But the NGOs who has been working in Afghanistan for so many years, they have to be funded, and it's not difficult these days because as people claim that the Taliban brought security, anybody can go and monitor and they're receiving the foreigners with open arms. On the accountability, I think to empower ICC, that's the only hope. And you know, the ICC is under-resourced institution. And not us, but the donors are choosing to support ICC for which country and not to support for Afghanistan. I mean, we all were happy when they indicted Putin. But why we are not talking about Hibatullah? And why we are blocking ICC's interference in Afghanistan and not funding it? It's much cheaper to fund ICC than the bombs that we are using to silence them. Final word, I mean, we all, thank you so much for everybody's interest, is that revenge is not justice. Revenge is not justice. So some US colleague asked me why the American failed, and I said, because you were in Afghanistan to take revenge rather than providing justice. Let's provide justice. Let's push for accountability. If we have justice in Afghanistan, we will have justice in the other part of the world also. And thank you so much. And let's not forget that we are all human beings and we have the rights to live. Doesn't matter. The human rights are not Western values. It's a human value. Towards implementation of that values everywhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much. I mean, although the turnout today was not very high, however, it's a very rich group, that I felt that I haven't seen these kind of discussions in many other meetings. And most of you are experienced in Afghanistan or conflict or gender issues. And you always don't get the people who are experts on the subject area to attend. Thank you very much. And I'm sure, I probably should have done it for 2 hours or 2.5 hours, because we haven't heard from a lot other people who I know have a lot to say. But we will get Anna, we will get the recording, right? You want to speak a little bit about that? That people who want the recording, how they can access?
Yes, so we'll have the recording in next week, and then we will publish it on the SIP's YouTube page, but we can also email it to everybody who had registered. So I imagine everybody here registered, but it will be on the event page, it will be on the YouTube page and social media. So we'll try to spread the word.
And I just want to, I do want to reiterate, for the sake of Afghanistan, not just the women, but also the men, I hope that the international community and those who are deciding to fund certain projects don't end up with major unintended consequences that are negative, and that they actually listen to Afghans and have Afghans sitting in the driver's seat. And when I say Afghans, it means a wide variety of Afghans and not just the specific people they like to work with. So I really, truly hope that your mission, because I've watched a lot of your videos, I truly hope that your mission is successful. Thank you.
Very good.